Jackson's bowels turned to water as the sleek human warship filled his view screen, bristling with weapons that could vaporize his entire civilization. The brilliant Cardassian engineer was performing a final inspection on the Cardassian Union's mightiest battlecruiser when the emergency alert blared across all comm channels. An unknown alien vessel, the Terran Dominion warship Indomitable, had emerged from an uncharted wormhole on a direct course for the heart of the Cardassian Empire. Jackson and the other engineers gaped as the menacing craft dropped out of warp by the orbital shipyards. Powerful scans couldn't even penetrate its hull. When Captain Frank Mitchell hailed them, Jackson's worst fears were confirmed. The humans had detected Cardassian scouts spying on their border colonies. This was their response. The human captain transmitted data on his ship's terrifying capabilities. The Indomitable was a mere fraction of the size of Jackson's battlecruiser, but outgunned it by an absurd margin. Human technology was centuries ahead of anything the Cardassians had. According to Captain Mitchell, a single Terran warship could defeat the entire Cardassian navy. As the transmission ended, Jackson pored over the specifications provided, his heart racing. If the humans decided the Cardassians were a threat, his people were doomed. Their only hope for survival would be to stay far away from human space. And Jackson knew there was only one way to ensure that. Without a word to his colleagues, Jackson left the orbital shipyards and boarded the first transport bound for the wormhole's coordinates. He had to reach Earth and convince the humans that the Cardassians meant them no harm. The fate of his entire species hung in the balance, and Jackson would have to defy the crusty Cardassian military leadership to prevent a war that would end in their annihilation. There was no other choice. As the Terran warship vanished through the wormhole, chaos erupted across the Cardassian Empire. The Central Command was in an uproar. Ghouls and legates stormed through the corridors, demanding answers about the mysterious human vessel. The Det Upper Council convened an emergency session, with representatives shouting over each other. "This is an act of war," one councillor bellowed. "The Terrans have sent a spy ship to gather intelligence for an invasion." "The Obsidian Order will get to the bottom of this," another vowed. "If the Terrans are plotting against Cardassia, we'll find out." Amidst the turmoil, Jackson locked himself in his lab, poring over the sensor logs from the encounter with the Indomitable. The more he analyzed the human ship's capabilities, the more his heart sank. Their technology wasn't just ahead of Cardassia's, it was centuries beyond anything he'd ever seen. The Indomitable's hull was composed of some kind of nanomolecular armor that could absorb the most powerful phaser blasts. Its shields used an advanced form of inertial dampening that rendered Cardassian weapons useless, and the sensors had detected an incredibly sophisticated AI running the ship's systems. But it was the weaponry that truly terrified Jackson. The Terrans possessed directed energy weapons of immense power. Based on the readings, a single shot from the Indomitable's main cannon could vaporize an entire Cardassian battlecruiser. As the truth sank in, Jackson felt a chill run down his spine. The Cardassians didn't stand a chance against the Terran Dominion. If the Central Command provoked a war, it would be a slaughter. Cardassia would burn. Days turned into weeks, and Jackson grew more and more convinced that he had to act. The Central Command was mobilizing for a preemptive strike against the Terrans, believing that a surprise attack was their only hope. They were fools blinded by arrogance and fear. Late one night, Jackson made his decision. He gathered up all his research on Terran technology and slipped out of the lab, moving silently through the darkened corridors. He had bribed a cargo ship captain for passage to the Ferengi Alliance, the only neutral power with trade ties to the Terran Dominion. The Ferengi merchant, a bulbous-headed alien named Blek, grinned toothily as Jackson approached his ship. "Well, well, well," he snickered, rubbing his hands together. "The Cardassian defector. You brought the latinum?" Jackson tossed him a pouch of gold-pressed latinum, the currency of the Ferengi. "That's half. You'll get the other half when you get me to the Terran outpost." Of course, Blek said, ushering him aboard. "Blek is a man of his word, yes?" As the ship took off, Jackson allowed himself a moment of hope. If he could reach the Terrans and share what he knew, perhaps he could prevent the coming war. Perhaps there was still a chance for peace. But his hope turned to dread when he overheard Bleak whispering into his comm system. "It's Blek. I have the Cardassian defector. Sending coordinates for the rendezvous, and tell the Obsidian Order the price just doubled." Jackson's blood ran cold. The treacherous Ferengi had betrayed him to the Cardassian authorities. Even now, Obsidian Order agents were likely speeding toward the ship, ready to drag him back to Cardassia Prime for interrogation and execution. In that moment, Jackson made another fateful decision. As Blek counted his ill-gotten latinum in the cargo bay, Jackson slipped into the airlock and snuck aboard the Terran freighter docked alongside Blek's ship. Mere minutes later, the freighter detached and went to warp, carrying Jackson away into the unknown. He huddled in the dark cargo hold, heart pounding, praying to the gods that the Terrans would be merciful. Days passed in a blur of fear and hunger. When the ship finally dropped out of warp, Jackson risked a peek out of a viewport. What he saw took his breath away. Outside was the most massive structure he had ever seen, a gigantic space station, bristling with docks and sensor arrays. Ships of every size and configuration flitted around it like insects, and in the distance, blue and green and beautiful, was Earth itself. "The Citadel," Jackson whispered, scarcely believing it. He had made it to the heart of the Terran Dominion. Just then, alarms began to blare throughout the ship. "Intruder alert!" a voice boomed over the intercom. "All security personnel to the cargo bay." Jackson burst out of his hiding place, frantically searching for a way out. He had to find someone in authority, had to convince them of the threat to both their peoples. But as the sound of booted feet grew louder, he knew his time was running out. The story segment ends here, without a formal conclusion, as I will continue writing more story segments building off this one in subsequent messages. Jackson's fingers flew over the maintenance terminal's interface, lines of code streaming across the screen. Sweat beaded on his brow as he worked frantically to slice through the Terran security protocols. Just a few more seconds. There. A message window flashed open, and Jackson hastily typed out his desperate plea to Terran intelligence. "Cardassian defector on the run. Have vital intel on military ops and tech. Need immediate extraction and protection. Please respond." He hit send and sagged back against the bulkhead, heart pounding. Would the Terrans believe him? Or would they dismiss his message as a trap? He had gambled everything on this one chance. Suddenly the terminal pinged. Jackson leaned in, hardly daring to breathe, and read the incoming message. "Jackson, this is Captain Frank Mitchell of the Terran Dominion warship Indomitable. We received your message and are prepared to extract you, sending coordinates for rendezvous. Be there in 20 minutes. Jackson blinked in disbelief. Mitchell himself had responded. Fingers shaking, he downloaded the coordinates to a data chip and erased all traces of his presence from the terminal. He had to move fast. If station security found him now... Exactly 20 minutes later, a nondescript shuttlecraft settled onto the landing pad at the designated coordinates. The hatch slid open to reveal a squad of heavily armed Terran commandos. They hustled Jackson aboard without a word and rocketed away from the Citadel. As the shuttle streaked towards Earth, Jackson finally allowed himself to relax fractionally. He was out of immediate danger, at least, but he knew his ordeal was far from over. The shuttle touched down at a sprawling military complex outside New Berlin. Jackson was whisked inside by the commando team and led into a stark debriefing room where Captain Mitchell was waiting along with a severe-looking woman in an admiral's uniform. "Mr. Jackson," Mitchell said, "this is Admiral Alina Nechayev, head of Starfleet Intelligence. We're very interested in what you have to say." Jackson took a deep breath. This was it. His one chance to convince the Terrans of the danger they faced. He met Mitchell's piercing gaze and began to speak. "The Cardassians are planning a massive invasion of Terran space," he said. "They've built a fleet of advanced warships armed with technology stolen from the Dominion. They think the element of surprise will let them overwhelm your defenses and establish a foothold in the Kalandra sector. Admiral Nechayev frowned. And what makes them think they can take us by surprise? Our sensor nets would detect any fleet movement. For they've developed a new cloaking device, Jackson interrupted. Reverse-engineered from Dominion specs, your sensors won't see them coming. Mitchell and Nechayev exchanged a worried glance. Jackson pressed on, outlining the full scope of the Cardassian battle plan and the capabilities of their ships. When he was done, the room was silent. Finally, Nechayev spoke. If what you're saying is true, the Cardassians represent an existential threat to the Terran Dominion. But why should we believe you? This could all be an elaborate deception. Jackson met her gaze steadily. Because I'm willing to share everything I know about Cardassian technology and tactics, and because I want asylum in the Terran Dominion, in exchange for my information. Mitchell leaned forward. You'd defect, turn your back on your own people. My people are on a path to self-destruction, Jackson said bitterly. I won't be part of it. I want to help you stop them before it's too late. Nechayev looked at Mitchell, who nodded slowly. He's telling the truth, Admiral. I believe his intel is genuine and invaluable. The Admiral sighed. Very well, Mr. Jackson. I'm granting you provisional asylum in the Terran Dominion. You'll be working with a team of our top engineers to bring them up to speed on Cardassian tech. She tapped a comm badge. Lieutenant Tavera, report to Briefing Room 3. Moments later, the door slid open to reveal a striking Vulcan woman in a Starfleet uniform. Admiral, she said, raising an eyebrow at Jackson. Tivara, this is Jackson, a Cardassian defector, Nechayev said. He'll be working with your team to analyze Cardassian technology and develop countermeasures. You're in charge of his security and integration. Tivara inclined her head. Understood, Admiral. She turned to Jackson. If you'll come with me, I'll show you to your quarters and introduce you to the rest of the team. As Jackson followed her out of the briefing room, he felt a surge of hope for the first time in months. The Terrans were everything he had dreamed of, technologically advanced, scientifically curious, and committed to justice. With their help, perhaps the Cardassian war machine could be stopped before it plunged the quadrant into war. But even as he began to settle into his new life, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching him from the shadows. The Obsidian Order did not forgive traitors, and he knew they would stop at nothing to bury the secrets he carried. He could only hope that his new allies were as formidable as they seemed. As Tivara showed him around the gleaming research facility, Jackson gaped in astonishment. Quantum supercomputers, zero-point energy generators, matter replicators. The Terrans were decades ahead of the Cardassians. Incredible, he murmured as Tivara explained the principles of warp field dynamics. With technology like this, you could explore the entire galaxy. That is our goal, Tivara said, but we have a more immediate problem. She fixed him with an intent look. The Cardassians cannot be allowed to gain a foothold in our space. Your knowledge may be the key to stopping them. Jackson nodded grimly. I'll do whatever I can to help. I won't let my people's mistakes drag the Terrans into war. As he bent over a subspace transceiver array, shoulder to shoulder with Tivara and her team, Jackson finally felt like he was where he belonged. He had a purpose now, a chance to make a real difference. But he couldn't shake the chill that crept down his spine whenever he saw a shadow flicker in the corner of his eye. The Obsidian Order was still out there, and they were coming for him. Jackson and Tivara huddled over the subspace transceiver array, their fingers flying across the controls. Lines of code streamed by as they worked to unravel the secrets of the stolen Dominion tech. The phase variance is still fluctuating, Tivara murmured, her brow creased in concentration. We need to stabilize the quantum field or the whole array will overload. Jackson nodded, adjusting the power flow. Try rerouting the plasma conduits through the secondary buffer. That should even out the flux. As they worked shoulder to shoulder, Jackson couldn't help but marvel at Tivara's brilliance. Her grasp of subspace mechanics was beyond anything he had seen, even among the finest Cardassian engineers, and her cool, unflappable demeanor was a welcome change from the hot-blooded arrogance of his former colleagues. For her part, Tivara found herself increasingly intrigued by the Cardassian defector. His knowledge of Dominion systems was invaluable, and his quick, creative mind complemented her own logical approach perfectly. Together, they were making progress that would have been impossible alone. "I think we've got it," Jackson said at last, leaning back from the console. "The phase variance is holding steady. If we can boost the power to the main deflector, we should be able to generate a stable subspace field." Tivara nodded, allowing herself a small smile of satisfaction. "Excellent work, Jackson. I believe we may have found the key to countering the Cardassians' new cloaking technology." Just then an alarm blared through the lab. Red lights flashed as a voice boomed over the intercom. "Intruder alert, security breach in Sector 7G. Jackson and Tivara shared a look of alarm. Sector 7G, that was the high-security wing where the prototype technology was stored. Before they could react, the doors to the lab burst open. A dozen black-clad figures stormed in, disruptor rifles blazing. Jackson shoved Tivara down behind the console as bolts of green energy sizzled overhead. Through the chaos, he caught a glimpse of a familiar face, angular ridges, cold blue eyes, a cruel twist to the lips. It was an Obsidian Order assassin known as the Shadow, a ruthless operative who had been hunting Jackson since his defection. "Take the prototype," the Shadow barked to his men, "and bring me the traitor alive." Disruptor bolts exploded around them as Jackson and Tivara crawled towards the exit. Jackson's heart pounded as he saw the Shadow's men prying open the vault where the Dominion tech was stored. They couldn't let that technology fall back into Cardassian hands. Just as they reached the door, a searing pain exploded in Jackson's side. He looked down to see a blackened, smoking hole in his flesh, the edges seared by a disruptor bolt. As he crumpled to the floor, he saw the Shadow standing over him, a disruptor leveled at his head. "Jackson!" Tivara cried, reaching for him. But the Shadow's men were too quick. They grabbed her roughly, dragging her away as she struggled in their grasp. "Tivara!" Jackson gasped, his vision blurring. He tried to rise, but his body wouldn't obey. As darkness closed in, the last thing he saw was the Shadow's mocking sneer. "You should have stayed loyal to Cardassia, traitor," he hissed. "Now you'll die alone knowing you failed your precious Terrans." Then the butt of a disruptor rifle slammed into Jackson's temple, and he knew no more. Jackson drifted in and out of consciousness as medics rushed him to the infirmary. His mind raced feverishly, haunted by the image of Tivara being dragged away by the Shadow. He had to save her, had to stop the assassins before they escaped with the prototype. Captain Mitchell's face swam into view above him, creased with concern. "What happened, Jackson?" he demanded. "How did the Obsidian Order get in?" "The Shadow," Jackson croaked, his voice rough with pain. "He took Tivara and the prototype. Have to stop him." He tried to sit up, but agony lanced through his side and he collapsed back, panting. Mitchell gripped his shoulder. "Easy, soldier. You're in no shape for a fight. Let us handle it." But Jackson shook his head stubbornly. "No, I have to go. I'm the only one who knows the Shadow, who can predict his next move." He met Mitchell's eyes pleadingly. "Captain, please. I can't leave her in his hands. I care for her." Something in his desperate gaze must have convinced Mitchell. The captain sighed heavily. "All right, Jackson, I must be crazy, but I'll back your play. We'll assemble a strike team, the best of the best." He tapped his comm badge. "Mitchell to bridge, plot a course for Cardassian space, maximum warp, and have Alpha Team meet me in the armory." He glanced at Jackson. "Looks like we're taking this fight to the enemy." Hours later, Jackson gritted his teeth against the pain as he checked the charge on his phaser rifle. Around him, the strike team made their final preparations, faces grim and determined. They were all human, the most elite soldiers in Starfleet, but they had accepted Jackson as one of their own. 30 seconds to beam down, Mitchell called from the front of the shuttle. "Remember, our objective is the prototype and Tivara. In and out, quick and clean. Jackson will take point. Jackson nodded, his jaw tight. He could feel the rage and guilt churning inside him, fueling his determination. He had led Tavara into this trap. He would get her out, or die trying. As the shuttle dropped out of warp, Jackson caught his first glimpse of their target. A remote asteroid base bristling with weapons emplacements. Cardassian ships swarmed around it like angry hornets. "Shields up, weapons hot," Mitchell barked. "Lay down covering fire and drop the stealth field on my mark." The shuttle swooped down, phasers blazing, as the strike team prepared to beam into the heart of the enemy stronghold. Jackson took a deep breath, his finger tightening on the trigger of his rifle. Somewhere on that asteroid the Shadow was waiting, and this time only one of them would walk away. The strike team materialized in a dim corridor, weapons ready. Instantly, disruptor bolts streaked towards them as Cardassian soldiers poured out of adjoining passageways. Jackson dropped two with quick shots, then ducked behind a bulkhead as the rest of the team laid down suppressing fire. "Fan out and find that prototype," Mitchell shouted over the din of battle. "Jackson, take Kai and Vorth and find Tavara. We'll buy you as much time as we can." Jackson nodded grimly and sprinted down the corridor, the two humans close behind. His heart pounded as he scanned each doorway, searching for any sign of Tavara or the Shadow. Suddenly a scream echoed from somewhere up ahead, a voice he recognized all too well. "Tavara," he called desperately. "Tavara, I'm coming." He rounded a corner and skidded to a halt, eyes widening in horror. Tavara lay crumpled on the floor of a large chamber, green blood oozing from a gash on her forehead. And standing over her, disruptor aimed at Jackson's heart, was the Shadow. "Drop your weapons," the assassin spat, "or the Vulcan dies." Jackson hesitated, his grip tightening on his rifle. The Shadow's finger tightened on the trigger. And Jackson fired, the phaser beam taking the Cardassian square in the chest. The Shadow crumpled, his disruptor clattering to the floor. Jackson rushed to Tavara's side, cradling her head gently. "Tavara," he whispered, "can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, hazy with pain but alive with recognition. "Jackson, you came for me." "Always," he promised, helping her to her feet. "I'll always come for you. Now let's get that prototype and get out of here." As they staggered towards the door, Jackson heard running footsteps. He turned, raising his rifle, and sagged with relief as Mitchell and the rest of the strike team barreled into the room. "We've got the prototype," Mitchell announced, triumph in his voice. "Now let's blow this place and go home." Minutes later, they were racing towards the shuttle, dodging disruptor fire from the remaining Cardassian forces. Jackson's side burned with every step, the half-healed wound throbbing mercilessly, but he refused to slow down. Tavara's arm draped across his shoulders as he half-carried her to safety. They were just steps from the hatch when a disruptor bolt seared past Jackson's ear, missing him by inches. He whirled to see the Shadow, his chest a smoking ruin, staggering towards them with murder in his eyes. "Jackson!" Tavara cried in warning, but it was too late. The Shadow raised his disruptor for one final shot, and Jackson charged, a wordless cry of fury on his lips. He slammed into the assassin with bone-crushing force, sending them both tumbling to the ground. They rolled across the rocky soil, grappling savagely, until Jackson pinned the Shadow down and wrapped his hands around the Cardassian's throat. "This is for Tavara," he snarled and squeezed with all his strength. The Shadow thrashed and bucked, but Jackson held on grimly until, at last, he felt the assassin go limp beneath him. Exhausted and bleeding, Jackson dragged himself back to the shuttle and collapsed inside just as the hatch sealed. As they rocketed away from the asteroid, the last thing he saw was the base erupting into a ball of flame, the prototype and the Shadow consumed in the inferno. Then he slipped into the welcome oblivion of unconsciousness, Tavara's worried face hovering over him. When he awoke, he was lying on a biobed in the Indomitable's sickbay, his wounds cleaned and dressed. Tavara sat beside him, her hand resting on his. Mitchell stood at the foot of the bed, a look of mingled pride and sorrow on his face. "So you did it, Jackson," the captain said quietly. You saved Tavara and recovered the prototype. The Cardassian invasion has been stopped cold. The Terran Dominion is safe thanks to you. But Jackson barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on Tavara, drinking in the sight of her like a man dying of thirst. I thought I'd lost you, he whispered hoarsely. She squeezed his hand, a faint smile touching her lips. Never. You will never lose me, Jackson. He started to smile back, and then suddenly a wave of agony crashed over him, stealing his breath. He convulsed on the biobed, every nerve on fire, as alarms blared and medics rushed to his side. Through a haze of pain, he saw Tavara's stricken face, heard Mitchell barking orders, and then, with a final surge of clarity, he understood. His wounds, they were too severe. The disruptor blast had done more damage than anyone realized. He was dying. With a monumental effort, he reached out and grasped Tavara's hand, pulling her close. Tavara, he gasped out. The prototype, the key to the technology. Take it. Use it to protect your people. Tears glimmered in her eyes as she nodded. I will, Jackson, I swear it. He smiled then, a final peaceful smile. I know you will. You're the finest engineer I've ever known, the finest person. His voice trailed off as his eyes drifted shut, his hand going slack in hers. Distantly he heard Tavara's anguished cry, felt her tears splashing onto his face. But he was beyond pain now, beyond sorrow. As the darkness claimed him, he knew that he had found his true purpose at last, and that his sacrifice would not be in vain. The prototype technology, the key to defending against Cardassian aggression, was safe in Tavara's hands. She would use it well, he knew. She would honor his memory and protect the Terran people, as he had always dreamed of doing. And someday, perhaps, when the Cardassian threat was nothing but a fading memory, the Terrans would remember the name of Jackson, the unlikely hero who had given his life for a cause greater than himself. The brave Cardassian who had found redemption in the end, and in doing so had forged an unbreakable bond of friendship that would endure long after he was gone. With that final comforting thought, Jackson surrendered himself to the welcoming embrace of eternity, and knew that he was at last at peace. In the weeks following the defeat of the Cardassian invasion, the Terran Dominion worked tirelessly to rebuild and strengthen its defenses. Tavara threw herself into the effort, poring over the schematics and prototypes that she and Jackson had created. She integrated their advancements into new shield generators, weapons systems, and starship designs, knowing that each innovation brought the Terrans one step closer to securing their borders. But even as she worked, Tavara couldn't escape the hollow ache in her chest. Jackson's absence was a constant presence, a void that could never be filled. She saw him in every line of code, every elegant solution to an engineering problem. He had been more than a colleague. He had been her friend, her partner, in the greatest challenge either of them had ever faced. And now he was gone, his brilliance snuffed out in a final act of sacrifice. Late one night, as Tavara pored over a trove of data recovered from the Obsidian Order base, something caught her eye. Hidden among the files was a series of encrypted transmissions, heavily coded and protected by layers of firewall. Intrigued, she set to work breaking through the defenses, her fingers flying over the console. What she found sent a chill down her spine. The transmissions were communications between the Obsidian Order and an unknown entity, filled with references to a species called the Borg. The more Tavara read, the more her dread grew. The Borg, it seemed, were a race of cybernetic beings, linked together in a vast hive mind. They sought to assimilate all life into their collective, stripping away individuality and free will, and the Cardassians, in their desperation to defeat the Terrans, had made a deal with the devil. In exchange for Borg technology to enhance their ships and weapons, the Cardassians had agreed to provide the Borg with information about the major powers of the quadrant, the Terrans, the Klingons, the Romulans. They had betrayed the entire galaxy, all for the sake of their own ambition. Tavara sat back in her chair, her mind reeling. The Borg made the Cardassians look like children playing with toys. If they were allowed to gain a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant, no force would be able to stop them. The Terran Dominion, for all its might, would be nothing more than another stepping stone on the path to assimilation. She knew what she had to do. Grabbing a datapad, Tivara rushed from her lab, hurrying through the corridors of Starfleet Command. She burst into Admiral Nechaev's office without knocking, startling the Admiral from her work. "Tivara," Nechaev asked, rising from her desk, "what's wrong?" "We have a problem, Admiral," Tivara said grimly. "A problem that threatens the entire galaxy." As Nechaev listened, her expression grew more and more grave. When Tivara had finished her explanation, the Admiral was silent for a long moment. "This is deeply disturbing," she said at last. "The Borg are like nothing we've ever faced before. If your analysis is correct, they pose an existential threat to every civilization in the quadrant." "We have to stop them," Tivara said, "whatever it takes." Nechaev nodded slowly. "Agreed, but we can't do it alone. We'll need allies, as many as we can gather." She tapped a key on her desk, and a holographic star map sprang to life in the center of the room. "The Klingons, the Romulans, even the Cardassians. We'll need them all if we hope to stand against the Borg." Tivara's jaw tightened. The thought of working with the Cardassians after everything they had done made her skin crawl. But she knew Nechaev was right. The Borg were too powerful for any one race to face alone. "I'll send envoys to the Klingon High Council and the Romulan Senate immediately," Nechaev said. "And I'll have Captain Mitchell open a channel to the Cardassian Union. If we can make them see the danger, they may be willing to cooperate." She fixed Tivara with a piercing look. "In the meantime, I want you to continue your work on adapting Borg technology to our own systems. We'll need every advantage we can get." Tivara nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "I'll get started right away, Admiral." As she turned to leave, Nechaev called after her, "Tivara, I know this won't be easy for you, working with the Cardassians after what happened to Jackson. But remember, this is bigger than any one of us. The fate of the galaxy is at stake." Tivara paused at the door, her hand resting on the frame. "I know, Admiral," she said softly, "and I won't let Jackson's sacrifice be in vain. We'll stop the Borg, whatever it takes." With that, she strode from the office, her steps ringing with determination. There was work to be done, and she would not rest until the Borg threat was ended. For Jackson, for the Terran Dominion, and for all the peoples of the galaxy. In the days that followed, the great powers of the quadrant came together as they never had before. Klingon battle cruisers, Romulan warbirds, and even Cardassian galleys joined the Terran fleet, putting aside centuries of animosity in the face of the Borg threat. It was an uneasy alliance, fraught with tension and mistrust. But slowly, grudgingly, the disparate factions began to work together, sharing intelligence and resources as they prepared for the fight of their lives. Tivara worked around the clock, integrating Borg technology into the Allied ships. She built new weapons, new defenses, drawing on every scrap of knowledge that Jackson had left behind. And as the fleet drilled and trained, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they had a chance. But that hope was short-lived. When the Borg came, they came in force, a massive cube bristling with weaponry beyond anything the Allies had ever seen. It shrugged off their most powerful attacks, its shields absorbing phaser blasts and photon torpedoes like raindrops. And then the assimilation began. One by one, Allied ships were caught in the Borg's tractor beams, their crews dragged screaming into the belly of the cube. Those that resisted were destroyed utterly, reduced to clouds of debris and frozen corpses. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Tivara watched in horror as the Allied fleet was decimated. Ships she had worked on, people she had known, all were being consumed by the Borg's inexorable advance. "We're not even slowing them down," Captain Mitchell said grimly, his face bathed in the red glow of the tactical display. "At this rate, they'll reach Earth in a matter of hours." Tivara clenched her fists, despair warring with determination in her heart. There had to be a way, some weakness they could exploit. She thought of Jackson, of the countless hours they had spent poring over Borg schematics and data files. He had been so close to understanding their technology, to finding a chink in their armor. And then, like a bolt of lightning, it hit her. The Borg's greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their hive mind, the very thing that made them so terrifyingly efficient, was also the key to their undoing. "The vinculum," she whispered, her eyes widening. "Captain, I know how to stop them." Mitchell spun to face her, hope warring with skepticism on his face. "What are you talking about, Tavara?" "The Borg are linked together by a central nexus called the vinculum," Tavara explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It's the heart of their collective consciousness. If we can disrupt it, even for a moment, it will throw their entire network into chaos." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "How do we do that? Our weapons can't even scratch their shields." Tavara shook her head. "We don't need weapons, we need a virus. A computer virus designed to infect the Borg systems and corrupt the vinculum. I can create one using the knowledge Jackson gave me." For a moment Mitchell was silent, weighing the risks and rewards. Then he nodded. "Do it, and fast, we're running out of time." Tavara raced to her console, her fingers flying over the controls. She poured everything she had into the virus, every trick and algorithm that Jackson had taught her, every scrap of Borg code she had assimilated. It was a symphony of logic and mathematics, a tapestry of ones and zeros that would unravel the very fabric of the Borg's being. And when it was done, she knew it was the most elegant thing she had ever created. "It's ready," she said, looking up at Mitchell. "We just need to get it into their systems." The captain nodded grimly. "Leave that to me." Under Mitchell's command, the Indomitable broke formation, weaving through the debris field of shattered starships. Phasers and torpedoes lashed out, drawing the Borg's attention away from the rest of the fleet. And then, at the last possible moment, the Indomitable fired a single shot, not a weapon, but a burst transmission carrying Tavara's virus. It slipped through a gap in the Borg's shields, worming its way into their computer core. For a heartbeat, nothing happened, and then the cube shuddered, its lights flickering and dimming. Drones stumbled and fell, their implants sparking and shorting out. The tractor beams holding the captured ships winked out, and escape pods began to stream away from the cube's sides. "It's working," Tavara cried, her heart soaring. "The vinculum is failing." All across the Allied fleet, a cheer went up as the Borg cube began to break apart, explosions rippling across its surface. Ships poured fire into the breaches, tearing through the weakened shields and into the vulnerable machinery beneath. And then, with a final terrible groan, the cube shattered, consumed in a blossom of light and heat. The Borg were defeated, driven back into the cold depths of space. But the cost had been high. As Tavara looked out over the battlefield, she saw the wreckage of countless ships, the bodies of friends and allies floating in the void. The Terran fleet had been decimated, the Klingons and Romulans and Cardassians reduced to a shadow of their former strength. And yet, even in the midst of the carnage, there was a flicker of hope. The peoples of the galaxy had stood together, had faced the greatest threat they had ever known, and they had won. The Borg would think twice before attacking again, knowing that the Quadrant's races could unite against them. As the Indomitable limped back to Earth, its hull scarred and battered, Tavara stood on the observation deck looking out at the stars. She thought of Jackson, of the legacy he had left behind. His knowledge, his sacrifice, had made this victory possible. He had brought the peoples of the galaxy together in a way no one had thought possible. And now, as the Alliance began the long, slow process of rebuilding, Tavara knew that his memory would live on. In every new ship, every new technology, every new bond forged between the races, Jackson's spirit would endure. The road ahead would be long and hard, she knew. The scars left by the Borg would not heal overnight. But as she watched the stars drift by, Tavara felt a sense of peace settle over her. They had won this battle, and whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Terran and Klingon, Romulan and Cardassian, all the peoples of the galaxy united as one. In that moment, Tavara knew that Jackson's dream had finally come true. And though he was gone, his legacy would endure, a legacy of hope, of unity, and of the unbreakable bonds that held the galaxy together. If you finished this story, please subscribe and like the video, then leave a comment that says, "I liked the story," and I will heart every single one of them. It really helps me. Thank you for your time.